I'm Bethany, 35, a nurse who married into the Webster family. What I thought was a fairy tale marriage to Michael, a brilliant surgeon, turned into a nightmare because of his mother Eleanor and sister Amanda. I endured years of passive-aggressive comments and sidelong glances, but nothing prepared me for what happened at that Sunday dinner. What began with a slap across my pregnant belly ended with an unexpected twist no one saw coming. Before I share what happened when the door opened, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe to hear more stories of family betrayal turned to justice. I grew up in a small town in Minnesota where everybody knew everybody and life moved at a comfortable pace. My parents worked hard, Dad as a mechanic at the local garage and Mom as an elementary school teacher. We weren't poor, but we definitely weren't wealthy. I learnt the value of hard work from an early age, picking up odd jobs, babysitting, and later working weekends at the local diner to save for college. When I got accepted to nursing school, I was the first person in my family to attend college. My parents were incredibly proud, but they couldn't afford to help much financially. I worked 2, sometimes 3 jobs while studying. It was exhausting, but I was determined to create a better life for myself. After graduation, I moved to Boston for a position at Massachusetts General Hospital. The big city was intimidating at first, but I quickly fell in love with the energy and possibilities. I worked in the emergency department, which was challenging but incredibly rewarding. I had been there for 3 years when Michael Webster came in with severe abdominal pain. He was 37, handsome, with dark hair, intense blue eyes, and a smile that made my heart flutter despite his obvious discomfort. The diagnosis was appendicitis, and he needed immediate surgery. I was assigned as his pre-op nurse, and there was an immediate connection between us. He didn't act like some of the other wealthy patients who treated staff like servants. Instead, he asked about my day and actually listened to my answers. When he was discharged, I thought I'd never see him again. But 2 days later, he returned with flowers and asked me to dinner. I hesitated. Dating patients, even former ones, wasn't something I normally did. But there was something about Michael that felt different, sincere. Our first date was magical. He took me to a small Italian restaurant where the owner greeted him by name. Over pasta and wine, we discovered we had the same sense of humor and similar values despite our different backgrounds. He told me about his work as a cardiac surgeon and listened intently as I shared stories from the ER. It wasn't until our third date that I realized just how wealthy his family was. He mentioned casually that his parents were hosting a charity gala at the Family Foundation. When I looked it up later, I discovered the Webster Family Foundation was one of the largest philanthropic organizations in New England, with assets in the hundreds of millions. As we continued dating, Michael introduced me to his world gradually. The first time he took me to his penthouse apartment overlooking the Charles River, I felt completely out of place among the original artwork and designer furniture. But Michael never made me feel less than. He said he loved my authenticity and how grounded I was. 6 months into our relationship, Michael took me to meet his parents at their mansion in Beacon Hill. I spent hours choosing the perfect outfit, settling on a conservative blue dress that cost more than my monthly rent. I wanted so badly to make a good impression. The Webster mansion was intimidating. 3 stories of old Boston money with a staff of 5 that included a butler who took my coat with white-gloved hands. Eleanor Webster, Michael's mother, greeted me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She was in her early 60s, but looked a decade younger with perfectly styled silver hair and impeccable posture. "So you're the nurse Michael has been telling us about," she said, looking me over from head to toe. "How interesting." Michael's father, Robert, was warmer, shaking my hand enthusiastically and offering me a tour of their art collection. Michael's sister, Amanda, arrived late, making an entrance in designer clothes. She was 5 years younger than Michael, never worked a day in her life, and it was immediately clear she shared her mother's reservations about me. Throughout dinner, Eleanor asked pointed questions about my family, making little comments like, "Oh, a mechanic, how resourceful." When I mentioned my father's profession, Amanda barely acknowledged me texting throughout the meal and rolling her eyes whenever I spoke. Michael seemed oblivious to the tension, proudly telling his family about my accomplishments at the hospital. Later when we left, he asked, "Wasn't that great? I think they really liked you." I didn't have the heart to tell him what I really thought. I was already falling in love with him and didn't want anything to spoil our relationship. I convinced myself that Eleanor and Amanda would warm up to me eventually. That was the first of many red flags I chose to ignore. Our relationship progressed quickly. Within a year, Michael proposed during a weekend trip to Cape Cod. The ring was his grandmother's, a family heirloom with a diamond so large I was afraid to wear it at work. When we called his parents to share the news, Eleanor's first question was whether we had discussed a prenuptial agreement. The wedding planning became a battleground. Eleanor insisted on taking control, dismissing my simpler ideas in favour of an extravagant affair at the Boston Harbor Hotel. My parents were visibly uncomfortable at the rehearsal dinner, seated at a table far from the main family. I overheard Amanda telling a friend she clearly hit the jackpot, from small-town nurse to Webster in one leap. Despite the tensions, our wedding day was beautiful. Michael looked at me with such love as we exchanged vows that I convinced myself everything would work out. We honeymooned in the Maldives 2 blissful weeks away from family pressure and hospital responsibilities. Reality set back in when we returned. Michael suggested we move into a Webster family property rather than his penthouse, a brownstone his parents weren't using. Cecilia, it was beautiful, but came with strings attached as Eleanor had a key and would sometimes drop by unannounced to check on things or suggest improvements to our home. For 3 years, I tried everything to win their approval. I volunteered for the family foundation, adapted my wardrobe to Eleanor's subtle suggestions, and attended every family function with a smile plastered on my face. Michael's work schedule grew increasingly demanding as he took on more responsibilities at the hospital where his father sat on the board. I often found myself alone at family gatherings, navigating Eleanor and Amanda's thinly veiled contempt. "Bethany tries so hard, doesn't she?" Amanda would say to family friends within my earshot. "It must be difficult coming from such humble beginnings." Eleanor would add, "She's learning, slowly, but she's learning." Michael's career as a surgeon was thriving. He was being groomed to take over the cardiac department following in his father's footsteps. We started talking about having children, creating our own branch of the Webster family. I thought perhaps a grandchild would finally help Eleanor see me as family. How wrong I was. The weekly Sunday dinners at the Webster mansion became a dreaded ritual. Each visit seemed to grow more uncomfortable than the last. Eleanor had a talent for delivering backhanded compliments that left me questioning myself. "That dress is lovely, Bethany. So brave of you to wear such bright colours with your complexion," she would say. Or, "The casserole you brought is quite interesting. It's nice to see such creative cooking." Amanda was less subtle. She would openly criticise my career choices. "I just can't imagine spending all day changing bedpans and dealing with bodily fluids. But I suppose someone has to do it." I tried to explain that nursing was much more than that. It was about patient care, medical knowledge, and often being the first to identify life-threatening changes in a patient's condition. But Amanda would just wave her hand dismissively. Michael would sometimes attempt to mediate, saying things like, "Mom Bethany saves lives every day," or "Amanda, that's enough." But these defences were half-hearted at best, and he would quickly change the subject, rather than truly confront his family's behaviour. After one particularly difficult dinner where Eleanor had criticised my table manners, suggesting I take etiquette classes to feel more comfortable in certain circles, Michael and I had our first serious fight. "Why don't you ever really stand up for me?" I asked him when we got home. "They're just old-fashioned," he replied, loosening his tie. "They don't mean anything by it. You're being too sensitive." Those words stung more than Eleanor's criticisms. I realised that in Michael's mind, I was the problem, not his family's behaviour. Still, I loved him, and I believed that our relationship was worth fighting for. After trying to conceive for over a year, I discovered I was pregnant. I took 3 tests to be sure before telling Michael. He was overjoyed, picking me up and spinning me around in our kitchen. For the first time in months, I felt like we were truly partners again. "Let's tell my parents at dinner this Sunday," he suggested. Mum has been hoping for a grandchild for years. I agreed, hopeful that the baby would change everything. I even bought a new dress for the occasion, a sophisticated navy blue number that I thought would meet Eleanor's approval. When we made the announcement over appetizers, the reaction was underwhelming. Robert offered a genuine congratulations, but Eleanor merely nodded and said, "Well, I suppose it was time. You're not getting any younger, are you, Bethany?" Amanda looked up from her phone long enough to ask, "Are you planning to continue working? I can't imagine leaving my child with strangers all day. But I guess that's normal for career women these days." Later, as the men discussed hospital politics in the living room, Eleanor cornered me in the kitchen. "You'll want to schedule comprehensive genetic testing, of course," she said, her voice deceptively casual. considering we know so little about your family's medical history. My family doesn't have any significant genetic issues, I replied, trying to keep my voice steady, and those tests carry risks. Better safe than sorry when it comes to the Webster bloodline, dear, she said with a tight smile. As my pregnancy progressed, Michael began working longer hours. He was leading a new cardiac research initiative at the hospital, an opportunity he couldn't pass up, he explained. But it left me alone to deal with his family's increasing interference. Eleanor began sending links to exclusive private preschools before I was even showing. Amanda gave me a stack of parenting books with passages highlighted about the importance of stay-at-home mothering. The contrast in how the family treated my pregnancy versus Amanda's engagement announcement was striking. When Amanda announced her engagement to Philip Thornton, heir to a banking fortune, Eleanor threw an extravagant party with over 200 guests. For my baby news, there wasn't even a card. The Thornton-Webster union is exactly what this family needs. I overheard Eleanor telling a friend at Amanda's engagement party, "Perfect breeding, perfect backgrounds, perfect match." I stood in the corner, 7 months pregnant, feeling like an outsider. Michael was busy networking with hospital donors, leaving me to fend for myself among people who clearly viewed me as an interloper. Eleanor's control over family decisions became increasingly apparent. She had opinions on everything from the colour of our nursery to which paediatrician we should use. When I suggested we might want to make these decisions ourselves, Michael would sigh. "It's easier to just go along with it, Bethany. Mom has connections everywhere, and she's only trying to help." But it didn't feel like help. It felt like a gradual erasure of my role as mother to my own child. The first real crisis in our marriage came when Michael's grandfather, the family patriarch, passed away at 92. Harold Webster had built the family fortune through real estate development in post-war Boston, and his funeral was attended by the city's elite. I had only met him twice, but he had been kind to me, telling Michael at our wedding that he'd finally brought some fresh blood into the stuffy old Webster line. 2 weeks after the funeral, Michael's father called a family meeting to discuss the inheritance. We gathered in the wood-panelled study of the mansion where generations of Webster men had made decisions that shaped the family's wealth and influence. Robert explained that while most of Harold's estate would be distributed according to his will, there was a significant portion, including several properties and investment accounts, that he had left to the next generation without specific allocations. "Father trusted us to distribute these assets appropriately," Robert said, looking uncomfortable, "in a way that best preserves the family legacy." Eleanor stepped in smoothly. "We've consulted with the family attorneys, and they recommend setting up separate trusts for Michael and Amanda with provisions for their children. Given the circumstances, they suggest some protective measures." "What circumstances?" I asked, one hand resting on my pregnant belly. Eleanor's smile was glacial. "Just standard financial prudence, dear. Everyone signs prenuptials these days." "We didn't," I pointed out. Michael and I had discussed it, but he had ultimately decided against it, saying he trusted me completely. "Yes, well," Eleanor exchanged a look with Amanda. "That was Michael's choice at the time." Later that evening, as Michael and his father reviewed documents in the study, I excused myself to use the bathroom. Passing by the kitchen, I heard Eleanor and Amanda in heated conversation. "It's not too late for a post-nuptial agreement," Amanda was saying. "The baby complicates things, but the lawyers said there are still ways to protect the family assets from that nurse." "Your brother is too soft-hearted for his own good," Eleanor replied. "But Robert is working on him. No Webster fortune has ever left the bloodline, and it won't start now." I froze my hand over my mouth to stifle any sound. My heart raced as I carefully backed away from the door and returned to the study, trying to compose myself. The next day, Robert called Michael to his office privately. When Michael returned home that evening, he was unusually quiet. Finally, over dinner, he broached the subject. "Dad thinks we should consider a post-nuptial agreement," he said, not meeting my eyes. "Just to clarify how certain assets would be handled if, well, if we divorced," I supplied, putting down my fork. "Is that what you want?" "Of course not." Michael looked genuinely distressed. "It's just family pressure. Dad says grandfather's inheritance comes with responsibilities to preserve wealth for future generations." "Our child is a future generation," I reminded him, my voice rising. "Or does our baby not count because its mother is just a nurse from Minnesota?" It was our first major fight. Michael accused me of being paranoid about his family's intentions. I told him he was blind to their manipulation. We went to bed, angry backs turned to each other in the darkness. The next morning, Michael apologized for raising the post-nuptial issue and promised to handle his family better. But something had shifted between us. I began noticing how often he took his family's side in small matters, how he dismissed my concerns about their behavior as oversensitivity. My pregnancy became increasingly difficult. I developed gestational hypertension that required close monitoring. My doctor recommended reducing stress and suggested I cut back my hours at the hospital. When I told Eleanor about my condition at the next Sunday dinner, her response was telling. Pregnancy isn't an illness, Bethany. Women have been having babies forever without making such a fuss. I worked right up until delivery with both Michael and Amanda. When I mentioned what my doctor had said about stress, Amanda scoffed. Some people just have a flair for the dramatic. Maybe it's an attention thing. That night, after another quiet car ride home, I found myself alone in our study while Michael was called to the hospital for an emergency. Searching for a book to read, I accidentally knocked over a stack of papers on his desk. As I gathered them up, a document caught my eye. Papers from the family lawyer regarding trust fund arrangements for our unborn child. The language was dense with legal terminology, but certain phrases stood out starkly. Webster bloodline beneficiaries. Trustee control maintained by Eleanor Webster until child reaches 30 years of age. And in event of marital dissolution, management reverts exclusively to Michael Webster. I felt physically ill. They were already planning to control my child's inheritance and push me out if our marriage failed. Worse, Michael had these papers, but hadn't mentioned them to me. My isolation grew as my pregnancy advanced. My parents lived across the country, and I'd lost touch with many friends due to my demanding work schedule and Michael's family obligations. I began to feel trapped in a gilded cage with my baby, the only true ally I had. After finding those documents, I made a decision. I started recording my interactions with Eleanor and Amanda on my phone. Not constantly, but during particularly tense moments. I told myself it was just to have proof for Michael that I wasn't imagining their hostility. Little did I know how crucial those recordings would become. 3 months into my pregnancy, we arrived at the Webster mansion for the usual Sunday dinner. The sprawling Georgian-style home looked particularly imposing that evening, its windows glowing amber against the darkening sky. Michael helped me up the granite steps, his hand protective at the small of my back. Despite our recent tensions, he was still attentive to my physical comfort. Mom's been in a mood all week, he warned as we approached the massive oak door. Dad said she fired another housekeeper yesterday. I nodded silently, steeling myself for the evening ahead. As we entered, I noticed the new security panel near the door, a sleek, modern addition to the otherwise traditional decor. New security system, sir, Michael asked, as his father greeted us in the foyer. Robert nodded. Your mother's idea. Cameras throughout the house and grounds. She says it's to keep the help honest, but between us, I think she's been watching too many crime shows. Eleanor appeared from the direction of the kitchen, immaculate as always, in a cashmere sweater set and pearls. There you are. Dinner's nearly ready. Her eyes flickered over my simple maternity dress, with barely concealed disapproval, before landing on Michael. Darling, you look tired. Hospital keeping you too busy. As Michael described a complicated surgery he'd performed, Amanda sauntered in with her fiancé Philip. She air-kissed my cheek, leaving a cloud of expensive perfume. Bethany, you're absolutely glowing, she said with false brightness. Pregnancy suits you, makes sense given your natural tendencies. I wasn't sure what she meant by that, but the slight curl of her lip suggested it wasn't a compliment. Philip, tall and bland with old money confidence, barely acknowledged me before launching into a conversation with Robert about stock options. The dining room was set with the usual formality, fine china crystal glasses and silver that had been in the family for generations. I settled into my chair feeling particularly vulnerable in the high-backed antique that made my pregnant body seem awkward and out of place. Conversation over dinner centered on family legacy. Eleanor dominated the discussion, speaking at length about the Webster name and its importance in Boston society. We've been here since before the Revolution, she told Philip, though he'd certainly heard this before. The Webster name appears on hospital wings, university buildings, and museum collections. It's a responsibility we take very seriously. I pushed my salmon around my plate, appetite diminishing as the conversation continued. Then Eleanor cleared her throat and made an announcement that sent a chill through me. Robert and I have been meeting with the family attorneys, she said, looking pointedly at Michael. In light of recent developments, we've decided to make some changes to certain inheritance structures. Nothing that affects current arrangements, of course, but adjustments to ensure the Webster legacy is properly protected. What kind of adjustments? Michael asked, reaching for his wine glass. Eleanor's smile was thin. Just some updates to the trust parameters for future beneficiaries. The lawyers recommended stricter bloodline provisions to protect the family interests. The implication was clear to everyone at the table. My child, despite being Michael's, was considered a potential threat to the bloodline. Something inside me snapped. After months of subtle jabs and barely disguised hostility, this direct attack on my unborn baby was too much. My child is Michael's child. I said, my voice steadier than I expected. Our baby is as much a Webster as anyone at this table. The silence that followed was deafening. Eleanor's eyes widened slightly, unused to being challenged, especially by me. Amanda stifled what sounded like a laugh behind her napkin. "Of course, dear," Eleanor finally said, her tone dripping with condescension. "No one is suggesting otherwise. We're simply ensuring proper oversight of significant assets. You wouldn't understand the complexities involved." Robert looked uncomfortable but said nothing. Michael shifted in his chair but kept his eyes on his plate. "I understand perfectly," I replied, placing one hand protectively over my belly. "You're trying to limit what my child inherits because you don't consider me worthy of the Webster name." Eleanor's face hardened. "I think you're being oversensitive as usual. Pregnancy hormones, no doubt." Dinner concluded in a strained politeness. As the men moved to the study for brandy and Amanda took Philip to show him some family photos, Eleanor asked me to help her bring coffee to the library. I followed her to the kitchen, my heart pounding. We were alone among the gleaming countertops and high-end appliances. She busied herself with the expensive espresso machine, her back to me. "You embarrassed the family tonight," she said without turning around. "Your outburst was inappropriate and showed a fundamental misunderstanding of how families like ours operate." Families like yours," I repeated. "You mean families that value money and status over love and acceptance?" Eleanor turned slowly, her expression coldly furious. "Don't pretend you married my son for love, Bethany. We both know exactly what attracted you to Michael. You have no idea how Michael and I feel about each other," I said, feeling heat rise in my face. "Please," Eleanor scoffed. A nurse from nowhere, Minnesota, suddenly interested in a surgeon from one of Boston's wealthiest families. It's the oldest story in the book. Before I could respond, the kitchen door swung open and Amanda walked in, her expression curious. "Everything okay in here?" I thought I heard raised voices. Eleanor's demeanor shifted subtly. With her daughter as witness, she became more openly hostile. "Bethany seems to think she has a say in Webster family financial decisions." I was explaining how things work in our world. Amanda moved to stand beside her mother, creating a united front. "You really don't get it, do you? You're an outsider, Bethany. You always will be." "My child won't be," I said, one hand still protecting my belly. Eleanor stepped closer, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper. "Your child will be raised as a Webster with or without your influence. Michael knows where his loyalties should lie." "He's my husband," I reminded her, backing up slightly. "We're a family." "You're a gold-digging nurse who trapped my son," Eleanor hissed, her carefully maintained facade cracking completely. "And I will make sure you never control a penny of Webster money." What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. Eleanor's hand came up suddenly and connected with my face in a stinging slap that echoed in the large kitchen. I stumbled backward, shocked more than hurt my back hitting the counter. Amanda's eyes widened briefly before her lips curled into a smile. "Mother!" she exclaimed, but her tone held excitement rather than censure. Emboldened by her mother's action, Amanda stepped forward. "You should see your face right now," she laughed. Then with deliberate slowness, she gathered saliva in her mouth and spat directly at me. The warm, wet glob landed on my chest just above where my hand protected my unborn child. Tears sprang to my eyes as the two women stared at me with identical expressions of contempt. I felt utterly powerless, cornered by people who were supposed to be my family. My legs trembled as I tried to steady myself against the counter. "Look at her crying," Amanda snickered. "Pathetic." Eleanor's smile was triumphant. "Remember this moment, Bethany. Remember your place." I moved to leave, desperate to find Michael to escape this nightmare. But they blocked my path, laughing at my distress. I had never felt so alone, so vulnerable. And then we heard it. The unmistakable sound of the front door opening. The kitchen fell silent. We could hear footsteps in the foyer, multiple sets moving with purpose, rather than the casual gait of family members. "Mrs. Webster," a deep, authoritative voice called out. "Boston Police Department, we need to speak with you immediately." Eleanor's face transformed from triumphant to confused. She straightened her sweater and whispered harshly to Amanda, "Not a word about what just happened. Do you understand?" Amanda nodded quickly, wiping the smug expression from her face, as Eleanor pushed past me toward the foyer. I followed at a distance, still shaking one hand, protectively covering my belly, while the other wiped away tears. In the grand entrance hall stood 2 uniformed police officers. Behind them were Michael and his father, their expressions grim. Michael's eyes immediately found mine widening as he took in my reddened cheek and tear-stained face. "Bethany." He crossed to me in 3 long strides. "Are you all right?" Before I could answer, the older of the 2 officers spoke. "Mrs. Eleanor Webster." Eleanor drew herself up to her full height. "I am Eleanor Webster. What is the meaning of this intrusion into my home?" The officer's face remained impassive. "We're responding to a report of assault. We have reason to believe you physically attacked your pregnant daughter-in-law just moments ago." "That's absurd." Eleanor laughed, but there was a nervous edge to the sound. "What possible reason would I have to assault anyone, let alone Bethany?" Amanda stepped forward. "This is ridiculous. We were just having coffee in the kitchen. Bethany must have made up some story to cause drama." The second officer, a younger woman, addressed Amanda directly. "And you would be Amanda Webster. We have information that you were also involved in the assault." Amanda's face paled slightly. "I don't know what you're talking about. We were just talking." Bethany is obviously confused. Michael still had his arm around my shoulders, but his expression was torn between disbelief and growing anger. "Dad, what's going on? Why are the police here?" Robert stepped forward, his face ashen. "Son, I was in my study reviewing some emails when I received an alert from the new security system. It's programmed to notify me of any unusual activity." "What are you saying?" Eleanor's voice had lost its usual confident tone. Robert couldn't meet his wife's eyes. "The kitchen cameras, Eleanor. They're motion activated with audio. I saw everything." A heavy silence fell over the room. Eleanor's hand went to her throat, clutching at her pearls. "Robert, you can't possibly believe..." I called Michael immediately. Robert continued, his voice strained. He was already on his way back. He'd forgotten his phone. When he saw the footage, he contacted the authorities. Michael turned to me, his face contorted with guilt and horror. "I'm so sorry, Bethany. I had no idea they would. I never thought..." The female officer stepped forward. "Mrs. Webster, Miss Webster, we have reviewed the security footage provided by Mr. Webster. It clearly shows an unprovoked physical assault against a pregnant woman, followed by a second assault involving spitting. These are serious offences." Eleanor's composure crumbled entirely. "This is a family matter. You have no right to interfere in a private disagreement." "Assault is not a private matter, ma'am," the male officer replied firmly, "especially when the victim is pregnant." Amanda began to cry, her earlier bravado evaporating. "It wasn't serious. We were just trying to make a point. Tell them Bethany..." All eyes turned to me. In that moment, with Michael's supportive arm around me and his father's horrified expression, I felt a surge of strength. For months, these women had bullied and belittled me, made me doubt myself and my place in my husband's life. Now their true colours were exposed for everyone to see. "They cornered me in the kitchen," I said steadily. Eleanor slapped me across the face and Amanda spat on me. "They called me a gold digger and threatened to take my baby away from me." The officers exchanged glances. "Mrs. Eleanor Webster, Miss Amanda Webster, we're placing you both under arrest for assault and battery. You have the right to remain silent." As the officers continued reading them, their rights, Eleanor's face drained of colour. Amanda began sobbing loudly, looking to her father for help. Robert stood frozen, shock and disappointment etched in every line of his face. Michael pulled me closer. "I'm so sorry," he whispered again. "I should have listened to you. I should have seen what they were doing." For the first time in months, I felt Michael was truly on my side. As the officers led Eleanor and Amanda toward the door, Eleanor turned back, her eyes blazing with humiliation and anger. "This isn't over," she hissed. "This family has connections you couldn't imagine." "Not anymore, Mother," Michael said firmly. "Not after this." As we watched the police lead them to waiting cruisers, I felt a strange mixture of vindication and sadness. This wasn't how I had imagined becoming part of the Webster family, but perhaps it was the necessary breaking point, the moment that would allow something healthier to grow from the ashes of Eleanor's toxic control. Robert approached us slowly, looking suddenly older. "Bethany," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I had no idea things had gotten so bad. Please believe me, I never thought Eleanor would physically harm you." I nodded, not quite ready to absolve him, but recognizing his genuine shock. The three of us stood in silence as the police cars pulled away, taking with them the two women who had made my life a nightmare since I entered the Webster family. "What happens now?" I asked quietly. Michael squeezed my shoulder. "Now we start over, and I promise you things will be different." The days following the incident unfolded in a blur of legal consultations and family chaos. Michael immediately moved me out of our brownstone and into the Four Seasons Hotel, insisting I needed a stress-free environment away from any potential confrontation. The luxury suite felt like a safe haven after months of walking on eggshells. Eleanor and Amanda spent only one night in jail before their high-priced attorney arranged bail. The charges, assault and battery against a pregnant woman, were serious, but as first-time offenders from a prominent family, they were released with restraining orders that prevented them from coming within 500 feet of me. News of the arrest spread quickly through Boston's elite circles. The Webster name, usually associated with philanthropy and old money respectability, became linked to scandal. Michael's hospital colleagues whispered behind his back. Invitations to social events suddenly stopped arriving. "Let them talk," Michael said fiercely when I expressed concern about the damage to his reputation. "I don't care what anyone thinks anymore. All I care about is you and our baby." It was the Michael I had fallen in love with. Protective, passionate, and putting our family first. The scales had finally fallen from his eyes regarding his mother and sister's behavior. Robert came to see me the day after the arrests alone and bearing flowers. He looked haggard. The proud patriarch suddenly diminished by family disgrace. "I've been blind," he admitted, sitting heavily in the hotel suite's armchair. "I knew Eleanor could be difficult, but I never imagined she was capable of what I saw on that video. The things she said to you." He shook his head, unable to continue. "Why did you install those cameras?" I asked, curious about the timing. Robert sighed. "Ironically, it was Eleanor's idea. She was convinced the new housekeeper was stealing silverware. She wanted to catch her in the act." A bitter smile crossed his face. Instead, the cameras caught her true nature. The family attorney, Mr. Patterson, arrived later that day for a difficult conversation. Elegant in his bespoke suit, he outlined the legal situation with practiced neutrality. "The evidence is unambiguous," he explained. "The security footage clearly shows an unprovoked assault. However, a public trial would be problematic for all concerned." "You mean embarrassing for the Webster family," Michael said flatly. Patterson inclined his head slightly. "There would be significant media attention. Your mother and sister's actions would be public record, as would any prior incidents that might come to light during discovery." My hand instinctively went to my phone, where I had stored recordings of previous verbal abuse. Michael glanced at me, understanding dawning in his eyes. "You have recordings, Blaise?" he said softly. It wasn't a question. I nodded. "I needed proof. You didn't believe me when I told you how they treated me when you weren't around." Michael closed his eyes briefly, pain etched across his features. "I'm so sorry, Bethany. I failed you." Patterson cleared his throat. "Given the strength of the evidence, we're prepared to offer a settlement. Financial compensation, a formal apology, and community service for both Eleanor and Amanda in exchange for reduced charges and no jail time. They assaulted my pregnant wife." Michael's voice rose. "They should face consequences." "They will," I said, surprising myself with my calmness. "But a lengthy court battle would keep this nightmare alive for months. I want to focus on our baby, on healing our family." My health improved almost immediately after being removed from the toxic environment. The hotel's quiet luxury and attentive service allowed me to rest properly for the first time in months. My blood pressure stabilized, and at my next prenatal appointment, the doctor noted significant improvement. "Whatever you're doing, keep doing it," she advised with a smile. "Your baby is developing perfectly now." Michael took a leave of absence from the hospital to focus on our family crisis. He spent hours in therapy, coming to terms with his role in enabling his mother's behavior and his failure to protect me. I was conditioned from childhood to keep the peace, he explained one evening as we sat on the hotel balcony overlooking the Boston skyline. Eleanor controlled everything: where we went to school, who we befriended, how we behaved. Defying her meant enduring weeks of cold silence and disapproval. It was easier to go along to convince myself her intentions were good, even when her actions were cruel. I reached for his hand, understanding for the first time the complexity of his relationship with his mother. You were her child. It wasn't your responsibility to see through her manipulation. But you were my wife, he countered, squeezing my fingers. Protecting you should have come first. I keep thinking about what could have happened if Dad hadn't installed those cameras if you'd been alone with them. The security footage became a turning point for the entire Webster family. Robert insisted that key family members view it, wanting them to understand the gravity of what had occurred. In the elegant conference room of the family attorney's office, aunts, uncles, and cousins watched in stunned silence as Eleanor slapped a pregnant woman and Amanda spat on her. "Is this who we are now?" Robert asked when the video ended, his voice breaking. "Is this what the Webster name has come to mean?" The family's shock turned to support. For Michael and me, but also for Robert, who found himself navigating the unfamiliar waters of family leadership without Eleanor's iron-fisted guidance. He threw himself into finding us a new home, insisting on purchasing a comfortable house in Cambridge, far from Beacon Hill and the watchful eyes of Boston society. "A fresh start," he said, handing us the keys. "No Webster history, no family strings attached, just yours to make into a home." The decision about whether to press charges remained difficult. The district attorney wanted to proceed, seeing an opportunity to demonstrate that wealth and status didn't place anyone above the law. Part of me wanted Eleanor and Amanda to face a judge, to have their actions officially condemned. But another part, growing increasingly protective of my unborn child, recognized that a prolonged legal battle would keep us entangled with Eleanor and Amanda. After much discussion with Michael, we agreed to the settlement Patterson had outlined, with one additional condition: both women would undergo psychological evaluation and counseling. "They need help," I told Michael. "Your mother has spent decades controlling everyone around her. That doesn't change overnight." The security footage was shown to the extended family, leaving no room for Eleanor to spin a different narrative. Cousins and in-laws who had previously followed Eleanor's lead in treating me coolly now called or sent notes of support. Michael's Aunt Patricia, Eleanor's own sister-in-law, visited us at the new house, bringing a handmade quilt for the baby. "I should have spoken up years ago," she confessed over tea. "Eleanor's behaviour has been getting worse, but none of us had the courage to challenge her. You're stronger than all of us, Bethany." As my due date approached, we settled into our new home. Michael returned to work part-time, his colleagues noticeably more respectful of his boundaries around family time. I reconnected with friends from nursing school, building a support network independent of the Webster family circle. Throughout this difficult period, I leaned heavily on my own family. My parents flew in from Minnesota, my mother's practical Midwestern wisdom, a balm to my wounded spirit. "Families come in all forms," she told me as we set up the nursery. "Some are born, some are made. You and Michael are making your own family now with your own rules and values." 7 months into my pregnancy, our daughter Emma was born. Healthy, perfect, and blissfully unaware of the family drama that had preceded her arrival. Michael cried as he held her for the first time, promising in a whisper that she would grow up surrounded by love and respect. Robert was the first visitor at the hospital, his eyes misty as he cradled his granddaughter. "She has the Webster chin," he said with a watery smile. "But your eyes, Bethany, she's the best of both worlds." Eleanor and Amanda did not come to the hospital. The restraining order remained in effect, and neither had yet completed the required counselling. But as I looked at my newborn daughter, I realised the Webster legacy would continue, just not in the way Eleanor had envisioned. Emma would inherit her father's name and perhaps some of the family resources, but she would be raised with values that went beyond wealth and status. She would know her worth came from within, not from a family name. And that was a legacy worth passing on. 1 year after that fateful Sunday dinner, our lives had transformed completely. Our Cambridge home, with its sunny kitchen and garden, where Emma could eventually play, felt worlds away from the formal Webster mansion where I had once felt so out of place. Eleanor and Amanda had completed their court-mandated community service at a women's shelter, an experience that Patterson assured us had been appropriately humbling for both of them. Their counselling sessions continued though. Whether any genuine insight resulted remained to be seen. The settlement had included a substantial trust for Emma that neither Eleanor nor Amanda could control, a point Michael had insisted upon. Robert had restructured several family assets to ensure Michael had independent financial authority, severing the monetary strings Eleanor had used to control him for so long. "I failed as a husband for many years," Robert confided during one of his regular visits to see Emma. "I let Eleanor run the family her way because it was easier than confronting her. I won't make that mistake with my granddaughter." Robert had become a doting grandfather, bringing thoughtfully chosen books and toys, rather than the ostentatious displays of wealth Eleanor would have preferred. He visited weekly, his relationship with Michael healing through their shared love for Emma. Michael had returned to surgery, but set firm boundaries around his schedule. He was home for dinner most nights and took one full weekend day to focus exclusively on family. The dedicated surgeon remained, but now balanced by an equally dedicated husband and father. My own healing journey had been complex. The physical trauma of the assault had resolved quickly, but the emotional wounds took longer to heal. I started seeing a therapist who specialized in family trauma, gradually working through the anger and hurt that had accumulated over years of subtle and not so subtle abuse. "You have every right to your feelings," my therapist reminded me. "Acknowledging them doesn't make you bitter or unforgiving. It makes you honest with yourself." Through therapy, I realized I had internalized many of Eleanor's criticisms, doubting my worth and my place in Michael's life. Recognizing those patterns was the first step toward breaking them. I returned to nursing part-time when Emma was 6 months old, finding a position at a community clinic that allowed me to use my skills while maintaining a healthy family balance. The work reminded me of my value beyond being a Webster, the competent, compassionate nurse I had always been. During my recovery, I connected with other women who had experienced similar in-law conflicts. Some had stories even more harrowing than mine. Decades of manipulation, financial control, even forced separation from their children. Their resilience inspired me, and together we formed an informal support group. "So many women suffer in silence," I told Michael after one particularly powerful meeting. "They think they're alone, or that speaking up will cost them their marriage." "What if it wasn't just informal?" he suggested. "What if we created something more structured, a resource for women dealing with toxic family dynamics?" That conversation led to the creation of the Family Boundaries Foundation, a non-profit organization offering counseling, legal advice, and community for those navigating difficult family relationships. Michael's medical connections and my nursing background gave us credibility, while Robert provided startup funding eager to transform the Webster legacy from one of exclusion to one of healing. The most difficult decision we faced in that year of recovery was whether to allow Eleanor and Amanda back into our lives, and by extension, Emma's life. The restraining order had expired and both women had formally requested a meeting. They've complied with everything the court required. Patterson informed us during a visit to review the foundation's legal structure. Eleanor has written a letter expressing her desire for reconciliation. Michael and I spent many evenings discussing the possibilities and risks. Emma deserved to know her grandmother and aunt, but not at the cost of her mother's well-being or her own emotional health. "We can't pretend it never happened," I said, as we sat in our garden, watching Emma sleep in her bassinet beside us. "But holding on to anger isn't healthy either, especially for Emma. We set the terms, Michael decided finally. Limited supervised visits, clear boundaries about acceptable behavior. One violation and it ends." The first meeting was arranged at a neutral location, a private room at the Four Seasons where we had stayed after the incident. Robert would be present, along with the therapist who had been working with Eleanor. Eleanor arrived precisely on time, dressed more simply than I had ever seen her. Gone were the ostentatious jewels and designer labels that had once defined her appearance. She looked older, somehow diminished. Her eyes went immediately to Emma, sleeping peacefully in my arms. Something softened in her expression, a glimpse of the grandmother she might have been all along. "Thank you for agreeing to see me," she said formally. The practiced social grace remained, but the cutting edge was gone from her voice. "She's beautiful. Would you like to hold her?" I offered, surprising myself. As I carefully transferred Emma to her grandmother's arms, I saw tears in Eleanor's eyes. Genuine emotion breaking through the carefully maintained facade. "I've made terrible mistakes," she said, looking down at Emma rather than meeting my gaze. "The counselor says I've spent my life trying to control everyone and everything around me because I never felt secure in my own position. It sounds like psychobabble, but..." She paused. but I recognize myself in it. It wasn't a direct apology, but it was a start. An acknowledgement that her behavior had been wrong. Over the following months, Eleanor continued therapy and maintained the boundaries we established for visits. Her relationship with Michael slowly began to heal, though it would never return to the controlling dynamic of the past. Amanda took longer to come around. The humiliation of the arrest and community service had hit her hard, damaging her standing in the social circles she valued so highly. Her engagement to Philip had been postponed indefinitely as his family distanced themselves from the scandal. 6 months after our meeting with Eleanor, Amanda requested her own reconciliation meeting. She arrived nervous, fidgeting with her purse strap in a way that made her seem much younger than her years. "I've been awful to you," she said bluntly, skipping the social niceties that usually characterized Webster interactions. "Not just that day in the kitchen, but for years. I followed Mum's lead because it was easier than thinking for myself." Her directness surprised me. "Why did you dislike me so much? We barely knew each other." Amanda looked down at her hands. "Because you made Michael happy in a way that had nothing to do with the family. Because you didn't need our approval or connections. Because you were strong in ways I never learnt to be." Her vulnerability was unexpected and touching. While our relationship would never be close, that conversation opened the door to a civil interaction that eventually evolved into a cautious friendship. Michael's transformation was perhaps the most profound. Therapy helped him recognize the patterns of emotional manipulation he had grown up with, and the ways he had failed to protect me from them. "I keep thinking about our early days," he said one night as we lay in bed, Emma asleep in her crib across the hall. "You were so authentic, so genuine. It was what attracted me to you in the first place. Then I spent years trying to make you fit into my family's mold, becoming something you weren't." "We both got lost for a while," I acknowledged, "but we found our way back." Our marriage emerged stronger from the crisis. The foundations had been rebuilt on honesty and mutual respect rather than Michael's family expectations. We communicated more openly, no longer walking on eggshells around difficult topics. As Emma grew from newborn to infant to curious toddler, we created new family traditions that honored both our backgrounds. Minnesota State Fair foods alongside respectful nods to Webster history. She would grow up knowing both sides of her heritage without being limited by either. The Family Boundaries Foundation thrived, expanding to offer services in multiple cities. Women and men from all backgrounds found support there, many of them surprised to discover that family conflict crossed all social and economic boundaries. I often shared my story at foundation events, leaving out the Webster name, but keeping the essential truth that boundaries were necessary for healthy relationships, and that standing up for oneself wasn't selfish, but essential. The most important lesson I learned, I would tell them, is that family isn't defined by blood or name or social standing. Real family protects and supports you, honors your autonomy, and helps you become your best self. One afternoon, as Emma napped and Michael was at the hospital, I sat in our garden, reflecting on the journey of the past 2 years. From the outsider nurse, trying desperately to fit into the Webster world, to the confident woman I had become. Setting boundaries, building a meaningful organization, creating a healthy family environment for my daughter. The doorbell rang, interrupting my thoughts. It was a delivery, a small, carefully wrapped package. Inside was a delicate silver frame containing a photo of my parents holding Emma, along with a note from Eleanor. "Family comes in many forms," she had written in her elegant script. "Thank you for teaching me that and for allowing me the privilege of knowing my granddaughter despite my unforgivable behavior. Some mistakes can never be fully remedied, but I am grateful for the chance to try." I placed the frame on our mantel next to photos of Michael, Emma, and me. It wasn't perfect reconciliation. That might never be possible given what had happened. But it was growth, and it was honest. Most importantly, it represented the breaking of toxic patterns that had persisted in the Webster family for generations. Emma would grow up with clear boundaries and healthy relationships. She would know that love didn't require sacrifice of self, that family supported rather than controlled, and that her worth came from within rather than from a surname or social position. That evening, as Michael and I sat in the garden watching Emma take tentative steps across the grass, I felt a profound sense of peace. The journey had been painful but necessary. The family we were building now was stronger for having weathered the storm. "What are you thinking about?" Michael asked, noticing my contemplative mood. "About how sometimes the worst moments can lead to the best changes," I replied, watching our daughter's determined little face as she navigated the world on wobbly legs, and about how building something new often requires tearing down what wasn't working. He nodded understanding. I'm so sorry it took such a dramatic wake-up call for me to see what was happening. We can't change the past, I said, squeezing his hand. But we've changed the future, for Emma and for ourselves. As the sun set over our garden, casting long shadows across the grass where our daughter played, I knew we had created something precious from the ashes of a painful experience. Not just a marriage or a family, but a legacy of respect and honesty that would shape generations to come. The Webster name would continue, but with new values attached to it, and that perhaps was the most meaningful victory of all. If you've experienced toxic family dynamics or bullying from in-laws, what boundaries have you found effective in protecting yourself? Would you have pursued legal action like we did, or handled things differently? Share your stories in the comments, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video if it resonated with you. Remember that standing up for yourself isn't selfish. It's necessary for creating healthy relationships. Thank you for listening to my story, and I wish you strength in your own journey toward family healing.